So now we're going to look at the two forms that will be used on day 3. The first one we're going to look at is identify accessibility. And we spent some time looking at considerations that we need to have for students with disability as well as English language learners. We really want to be careful of having equity for all students. The information that's included in this form may or may not be relevant for all of the materials we're working with, but we can identify some of the present accessibility features. So we would look back at that stimulus and make sure that it is definitely accessible to all students, so we could use that information from the text complexity rubric to ensure that it is accessible. That was on the explained form number 1, so we could pull that up just for illustrative purposes. And so we went through the passage and we made sure that structure, its language features, its purpose, its knowledge demands, that when we're really looking at if it's exceedingly complex or slightly complex, that we use kind of those rules of thumb. So we want to make sure to have it be a more accessible text, and to make things more complex, we can adjust the task. And so just keeping that in mind. So we could describe that back in the form. For accessibility features, just talking about text complexity, any language, anything in the STEM that made the item more accessible. If we do have a strategy specific for one of these student groups, we would identify it here. So is it specific for students with severe cognitive disabilities, or students with disabilities, or English language learners, gifted and talented? Let's say for this we're going to focus on something that's adapted for English language learners, because there are some discipline-specific vocabulary and things that we could do to make sure that this is accessible to our English language learners. We're going to focus in on reading that passage. Do we have any additional language structures or features to address here? Or do we just simply want to use the information that we already supplied on Form 1 in Day 1? So the support strategy, again, there's no need to duplicate this information because it's going to be made available to us in the L strategy picker. And so here would be an example of a word sort. We could also think about, for this activity, maybe heterogeneous mixing of students might be a great way to adapt this. And then we're going to provide information to describe this additional support. So how would students adapt this strategy to meet the needs of these students? List the steps the teacher would need in order to adapt, modify, or make this tailored assessment more accessible to the selected student group. Are there additional supplemental resources needed? Any comments? And again, you can see these things have not been given a red required box because it may or may not be appropriate depending on the materials. And then, are there any considerations for sensitivity and bias? And so you want to try to be as complete and detailed in your descriptions for all of the variables that are included in the form, but if it doesn't make sense to you, don't force it. And so that's one of the things that we've put here in the notes. So again, only red around a box is required. For all fields, don't force an answer or respond with information that doesn't make sense or come naturally, and just do your best to be complete and descriptive. So that summarizes Form 3, which is accessibility, on the things you need to think about with the checklist and the item and using this form.